Welcome everybody, it is the 20th of February 2025. We're going to do a little tour of the garden as we are sort of heading to the end of summer. Well, I mean, by the calendar it's nearly the end of summer. From a weather perspective, we've already been turning that way for the last week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. So we're going to have a look around the garden, just see what's going on with some of those main pieces and give you an update. So our avocados are doing really well. They're budding quite a lot off the top. So when the actual colder weather comes around, then we'll have to actually start bringing these inside at night. We did have a couple of really cold days last week where it got down to 1 degree or so, after the week prior having about 37 degrees. So it's getting to the point where we're going to have to be a little bit more careful of these avocados. And if you recall, we will have to be very careful as these are quite young. They're only about 2 years old. And that means that for the time being, they're not as resilient to the cold as they will be when they get a little bit older. So I've got them on the little wheelies, the dollies, as I have for a very long time now. And we'll just actually push them into the garage at night when they need a bit of cold protection. There is one really interesting update here. I'm going to have to hold up the lid so I can't show you properly, but this is the strawberry spinach. You can actually see here the little buds, the fruit that is growing on these just here, where I haven't actually eaten any yet, but they're very similar to strawberry in their looks. I don't know about flavor, but this entire plant you can basically eat. And I've been wanting to grow this for quite some time, so it's really cool that it's actually come up quite nicely. But we'll give it a go, maybe put it in some salads and see how it goes. And while not a vegetable update, I recently did get some carnivorous plants. As you can see here, we got the Sarracenia and the Venus flytraps. These are growing really well. I have had them in the past when I was a kid trying to grow these, as many kids do, I think. And some of the mistakes that you would make as a kid, or perhaps as a new gardener of carnivorous plants, I have rectified for the most part. So in essence, the soil is very inert, no nutrients in this. It's basically perlite and some cocoa coir. And then you one of the biggest things is to feed them basically a demineralized water. So you don't want any sort of nutrients in the water as well. And that's a very common reason that people kill them. Another reason that people kill them is because they keep them inside and don't give them any light. And as with all sorts of plants, the majority of plants, they need light. So you have to keep them outside. So these guys are doing really well. The Sarracenia pitcher plants have grown quite well too. They've sprung up quite a lot since I bought them, and these the flytraps have done really well. Just next to the strawberry spinach from earlier is the curry tree that I got for Christmas from my dad. This has been doing, I guess, quite well. It's been growing some new buds up the top, which are doing quite well. And I'm just this is very much a freestyling kind of plant. I actually have no idea of the conditions that are required for this, so I'm going to have to be very careful when we get into our very cold winters here. Meanwhile, another sort of unfriendly to winter plant is the raspberry. So we've gotten a couple of small raspberries off these plants. We've got one there, and then there are 2 over here. So we've got multiple canes that have come up, and I'll just try and, these are very spiky as well. But as you can see, we've got a few raspberries growing in there. There's one at the back which is ready to pick almost once it gets a bit more color, and a few more here as well. So these raspberries are doing quite well, and I probably expect that by the time we have another video, they might be starting to shut down for the winter. So we'll see what happens. One of my favorite things in the garden is to experiment, and in this corner it's been quite interesting because we have some borage as you normally do, and then I have actually had some tomatoes. Random tomato seeds were thrown in here, but the biggest thing is actually the pumpkin, both literally and figuratively, as this pumpkin has crawled its way across. And I'll just sneak in here. We've got this is a Waltham butternut pumpkin. And this has made its way from over there. Actually, it's not actually part of this particular side of the garden, but it's made its way over and is doing quite well. And it also, I trained it up the little archway that we have into the backyard, and even now have it climbing across this particular ornamental tree that's here. So this is also the same plant that you see here. I let this one go. As you can see down there, we've got a couple of extra pumpkins that are coming up, but I've just let it go to see how far it'll go in terms of obviously managing the cold as well. Once we get to a certain point, this guy will start to shut down a bit, but hopefully we get a lot of these pumpkins growing through, and they'll help us out with a little bit of pumpkin action, particularly the dog. Our dogs like the pumpkin, so we'll probably use it for some of their food. While I'm here, I'll just give a quick update on this bed as well. So as you can see, this is very, very jungle-like. If you recall from previous videos, this is essentially the throwaway bed. So where I had extra seedlings from other plants around the garden, this is where I put them. The tomatoes I did not look after very well. As you can see, they've just gone all crazy types of growth all through this garden. There's basically 6 tomato plants here, and they're also kind of doing what they want. So it's something which I'll do better next time. Learnt a lot about tomatoes this season, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But the good thing is that we've gotten heaps of zucchinis. There's still more coming. In fact, there's probably one in here which I've missed. I know there's some younger ones. But yeah, and then there's also those beans at the back. So I didn't really think these beans would grow, but they did. So I'm going to try and harvest some of the dried up beans and use them for next season. And that's effectively this bed, which also has the teddy bear ear sunflowers at the end, which are just finishing up as well. So this bed's done quite well, quite productive. Perhaps not, let's say, effectively productive, but we'll work on that for next year as the next summer season rolls around. One of the other things we'll also just talk about while we're here, the greenhouse, which I've spoken about probably every single video, is on the way. I've purchased a greenhouse. We're going to set up a concrete pad in this area, and hopefully by the time of the next video, this will actually be a greenhouse which will house our seedlings. Not only the seedlings that we use for starting things up, but then also to house our avocado, and I think the curry plant will need to go in there as well. So greenhouse on the way. Check this space very soon in the next video. I'll give you a broad shot of the, I guess, main area of the garden. So there's already been a lot of change and perhaps some things that I didn't get to capture in the last video, but we'll start with our potatoes. So potatoes are nearing the end of their time. It's nearly time to harvest these. I've got at least 10, 12 potato plants in here. This is the red Pontiac variety. The foliage is starting to die back, which is generally where you want to look to harvest them once the foliage dies down. So we're going to have a big batch of potatoes that'll come in the near future. I'm kind of predicting about 2 to 3 weeks maybe left on these guys, but really happy with how this bed turned out, especially given this was like a freshly constructed bed back in October when I planted the potatoes, and utilized some country wildflower kind of seeds to add a little bit more for the pollinators, as I have through random sorts of parts of the garden. We've then got our main beds, which you'll probably look at a particularly striking feature here. This is where I did have the giant Russian sunflowers. So up until last week-ish, maybe a little bit earlier, these were actually fully bloomed sunflowers. Oh, sorry, they were fully bloomed several weeks ago, but then as they do, the heads started to die off, and so I've cut them all off. And what I'm doing here is using these for, well, I had pea seedlings in here, but unfortunately with the insane fluctuations of the weather, where we've had, as I mentioned earlier, a day of 1 degree in the morning, and then we have days of mid 30s to almost high 30s, the peas didn't do so well. But the premise was going to be that the peas or perhaps something else that I can put in there were going to grow up these sunflower stalks. So just a little bit of recycling, garden recycling, if you will, which is hasn't really worked out for the time being, but we'll give it a go next time. Other things in this bed include just some random capsicums. We've got our basil, which is effectively finished up. I'm about to harvest these and make some pesto with all the basil that we've got. Not only this section, but also there's basil near the tomatoes. There were some cucumbers here. We got a reasonable amount of cucumbers, and they were quite delicious. So I'm quite happy with how that turned out. I've also got summer squash, which is something I've never grown before. As a kid, I wasn't a huge fan of it. You can sort of see them there on the left. Heaps and heaps of flowers. There's probably one or two over there that I can pick. But this has done really well. Started out very slowly at the sort of the midpoint of summer. This was actually to fill in this bed because I had carrots here that didn't actually germinate. And I found the summer squash along with the golden zucchini we'll see in a moment, and just gave it a go. And they've actually gone really, really well. So we'll use some. I have already been using these in dishes in our dinners and things like that. We've also got a beetroot here, which I completely forgot about until this very moment. But yeah, summer squash doing really well. This section up the back of bed number 1 was iceberg lettuce. And they were all harvested, did really, really well with all the lettuce that we got from the icebergs. And now I've just replaced it with some Asian greens just to fill up the time until winter. So these should be at a reasonable point by about sort of mid-March or so. And I'll just harvest them pretty quickly or pretty young at that point. And then that'll make space for the winter brassicas and other things that we'll put in this spot. Over in bed number 2, we've got our golden zucchini. These are, if you haven't seen these before, they're basically round zucchini. As I've got one just here. They go this kind of yellowy gold color and actually darken to an orange, which I think I've got a version of it over here. Perhaps not great on the camera, but yeah. These have a really interesting flavor. I'm not 100% sure if I'm a fan just yet, but this has done really well as well from a mid-season planting, so quite happy with that. Alongside them, we've got things such as chilies, heaps of chilies in here. In fact, I'll probably have to harvest some of these very soon. Lots of chilies that I can use to make some jams or other sorts of usage in dishes. These snapdragons, which if you're a long-term watcher, these have been here for nearly 2 years and they're finally dying, which is pretty impressive considering they're normally just an annual. Then at the end of the bed, capsicums, which aren't really growing that well. I'm going to fertilize them a bit better and we'll see if they pick up a bit. But they're hopefully going to get to harvest them very soon. And again, these were the giant sunflowers at this end of the bed. Cut them all off and attempting to use them for these peas, which you can see here. Let's have a look at the tomatoes next. Now the tomato side of the garden, everything went according to the plan and what I envisaged we'd get over here. However, there were some, let's say, rudimentary mistakes that I made. Number 1 was not being careful with pruning the leaves at the bottom of the plants. You can see here's this one's a pretty good example. Pruned it all off, but I actually did this very late. So a lot of the tomatoes that I have did not ripen up properly because they weren't getting enough airflow or sun. And so I kind of rectified that too late. One other thing that I messed up, and you can see some damage from pests in here. This netting is just to deal with the birds, which of course love the tomatoes. But another thing was lack of fertilizing. I generally haven't used fertilizers much in my gardening career, if you want to call it that. And this time it certainly paid the price because the tomatoes didn't ripen. Problem is if they don't get enough of their nutrients, they won't ripen, as well as the sun and the airflow. So these are things that I learned in this particular summer. I did get a reasonable amount of tomatoes, just not much and not huge ones or anything like that, unfortunately. But we will have some learnings for next time. So next year I'll look to build a big frame that will actually sit in this area, cover off the tomatoes, keep the pests away from them as best as I can, particularly the starlings. They come in here and they cause all sorts of grief to the garden. But also I'll be doing a better job with their regular watering and their feeding as well. But the tomatoes kind of done at this point, so I'm not too worried about how this all goes, but there is the odd winner which you can see in there. And other than that, the last part of the garden, probably the most interesting one for this kind of area I'm in, is the banana grove. So I can't remember if it was on the last video, but we added a third banana in here. So we've now got 3. The one at the back, the biggest one, is doing really, really well. They did get a little bit confused with what was going on with the weather. As I mentioned, there was a heat wave of basically 37 degrees for 3 to 4 days. And then suddenly it turned to 1 degree in the morning. So there is a little bit of frost damage, as you can see here on this one. So this was a new leaf, and unfortunately that one got damaged quite a lot, but it's still persisting, which is good. We've also got some young banana pups, if you want to call them that, coming off the bottom there, and which is helping to grow more for next season. So probably by the time the next video is up, these will have started to die off a bit, all the leaves, luckily, as a very resilient plant to a degree. The core will stay there, we'll keep it warm, we'll put some extra mulch and some extra soil in here just to make sure the core part of the I think it's a rhizome, stays warm. And then come next spring, these guys will spring back up, and we'll hopefully have some good bananas. One thing that we have in the front yard, of course, was the corn. So this was also harvested, got green corn inside, attempting to make some flour from this. And what I've done with the leftovers, as you can see, very similar to the backyard, is that I'm attempting to use these to grow some peas up the stalks there, and we'll see what happens. It might not work, otherwise come winter this bed will turn into something else a little bit more productive. But yeah, really exciting to grow the corn. Worked out relatively well. I think I might do a different type of corn in the next summer season. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the tour of the garden, and I'll see you next time.